You will not believe what sparked one of the wildest court battles Judge Judy has ever seen. A simple backyard fence turned into a full-blown legal war when one angry neighbor dragged a hard-working family into court just for adding color to their property. In this video, we step inside the courtroom as Judge Judy takes charge in a fiery showdown between two suburban neighbors whose feud over a painted fence reveals shocking secrets. Stay till the end because what starts as a petty argument explodes into something much deeper and more personal. And trust me, this is one of those rare cases that never made it to video. Straight from the secret Judge Judy files. It was a quiet morning when the courtroom doors swung open and in walked a woman whose face was locked in a permanent frown. Her name was Cheryl Robinson. Dressed in a navy blazer and heels that clicked loudly on the polished floor, she clutched a folder tight against her chest as if it contained her entire reputation. Behind her came her attorney, a young man named Brent Collins, who looked more nervous than she did. On the opposite side stood a middle-aged man with kind eyes and paint still stuck in his fingernails. His name was David Miller, a father of 3 and a proud homeowner for more than 20 years. He wore a simple button-up shirt and jeans. His wife Nicole sat behind him, holding their youngest daughter on her lap. Their other 2 kids peeked around her, sensing something important was about to happen. Then the door behind the bench opened. All heads turned. Judge Judy entered the courtroom with that signature stare that said she had no time for nonsense. The bailiff called the court to order as she took her seat. She looked directly at Cheryl and David and said in that no-nonsense tone, "Let us get one thing straight. This is not a talk show. This is a courtroom." Cheryl cleared her throat and stepped forward as her attorney handed a few papers to the clerk. "Your Honor," Cheryl began, "I am suing Mr. David Miller for $2,700 in damages." Judy blinked slowly. "Over what?" Cheryl's voice rose with each word. "He painted his fence pink." Judge Judy held up one hand. "Stop, I am going to need you to go back explain that from the beginning." Cheryl huffed and adjusted her blouse. "Your Honor, David and I are neighbors. I live directly beside him. We have a shared property line and a connecting fence last month without consulting me. He painted the fence on both sides bright pink. It clashes with my home. It brings down the value of my property. And frankly, it is just plain ugly." Judy turned to David, who stood calmly with his hands folded in front of him. "Mr. Miller, is any of this true?" "Yes, Mom," David said clearly. "I did paint the fence, but not both sides, only my side. And I did it because my daughters asked me to. They wanted something cheerful and fun. We used a shade called cotton candy. It is soft, not bright like she is saying." Judge Judy leaned back in her chair and scanned through the documents. "Did you, too, have a written agreement about the fence?" Cheryl shook her head. "No, but it is common sense that anything done to a shared structure should be approved by both parties." Judy pointed her pen at Cheryl. "Common sense is not law, Miss Robinson. I deal in facts and contracts, not assumptions." She turned her attention back to David. "Did you pay for the entire fence?" "Yes, Mom, the fence was installed 5 years ago. I paid for the materials, and I paid the contractors. Cheryl did not contribute to the cost. That is why I considered it mine." Judy looked back at Cheryl. "Is that true?" Cheryl hesitated, but then nodded. "Yes, but we agreed it would be a shared boundary." Judge Judy raised an eyebrow. Shared boundary does not mean shared ownership. Unless there is paperwork showing co-ownership, I am leaning toward Mr. Miller on this. Cheryl's lawyer suddenly stood up. Your Honor, I would like to present evidence that this paint job violates the neighborhood's HOA regulations. Judy sighed and motioned for the documents. The bailiff brought her a printed copy of the HOA guidelines. Cheryl had highlighted a section that read all exterior home alterations must be approved by the HOA board, including visible fencing. Judy read it twice, then set the paper down. Was this fence visible from the street? David shook his head. Only from Cheryl's kitchen window and my backyard. It is not visible to the public or from the road. Judy looked at Cheryl. Did you file a complaint with the HOA? Yes, I did, Cheryl replied proudly. They are looking into it. Judge Judy gave a sharp nod. But they have not issued a penalty or fine. Not yet. Then I do not care about what they might do. I only care about what they have done. There was a moment of silence in the courtroom as the tension settled. The youngest Miller daughter in the back row let out a loud sneeze that made several people chuckle. Judge Judy leaned forward and looked at Cheryl again. So you are suing for emotional distress and property devaluation because a fence you did not pay for painted a color you do not like on the side you cannot see unless you lean out your window. Cheryl's jaw clenched. Yes, Mom, that color offends me every time I see it. I feel disrespected. It is childish, and I believe he did it to spite me. David shook his head. That is not true. I just wanted my kids to have something happy to look at after a hard year. We lost my mother recently, and this was their way of healing. Judy's face softened just slightly. I am sorry to hear that, Mr. Miller. Then her tone turned back to business. Miss Robinson, did Mr. Miller ever threaten you or say he painted the fence to bother you? No, but his kids are always loud. They run around screaming and laughing in that backyard, as if it is a public park. Judy held up a finger. That is not what you are suing for. You are suing for paint on a fence. Cheryl crossed her arms tightly across her chest. It is all connected, Your Honor. It is about respect. Judge Judy stared hard at her, then said, Let me be clear, this is not a therapy session. This is a court of law. David's wife, Nicole, stood suddenly from the bench. Your Honor, I know I am not supposed to speak, but I just want to say one thing. Judy nodded slowly. Go ahead, but make it quick. Nicole held her baby close and said, We do not want trouble, we just want to be left alone. We built our fence, we maintained it, and we paid for it. Cheryl has reported us to the HOA 3 times in the past year, once for planting sunflowers, and once for hanging wind chimes. The gallery whispered softly. Judge Judy tapped her pen on the desk. This sounds more like a neighbor dispute than a legal case, and in most of those situations I tell people to grow up and talk to each other like adults. But since you brought it here, Miss Robinson, I will treat it like a case. She leaned forward. Unless you can show me receipts proving you paid for half that fence, or a signed agreement saying you share ownership, you are not going to win today. Cheryl looked crushed. Her lawyer sat down without another word. Judge Judy continued, We are not done, yet I want to hear more about how this supposed emotional damage came about, because I find that very hard to believe. She tapped the desk again. Court will resume After a short break, as people stood and shuffled out for recess, the courtroom buzzed with tension. But one thing was already clear. Judge Judy was not buying Cheryl's painted fence drama without solid proof. As the courtroom settled after the break, Judge Judy re-entered with a folder in hand. Her gaze moved quickly from Cheryl to David and then back again. "All right, let us get back to business." Cheryl stood straight again, her lips tightly pressed together. Her attorney sat still, his notebook untouched since the break. "Miss Robinson, earlier you claimed emotional distress. As part of your damages, I want to hear more about that. Explain clearly what this paint color has done to you." Cheryl lifted her chin. "Your Honor, ever since that fence was painted, I have felt anxious in my own home. I cannot look out my kitchen window without feeling disrespected. I have had headaches and sleepless nights thinking about how my property is being devalued." Judy narrowed her eyes. "Do you have any medical documentation, any therapist reports, doctor's notes, anything to prove that your mental health has been affected?" Cheryl glanced sideways at her lawyer. "No, Mom, not at this time." Judge Judy leaned forward. "Then you are telling me this is all based on how you feel, not on actual documented evidence?" Cheryl nodded hesitantly. "That is correct." Judge Judy turned her head slowly toward David. "Mr. Miller, did you at any point paint that fence to provoke Miss Robinson?" David shook his head. "Absolutely not. My girls picked the color. They just lost their grandmother, and painting the fence together was something that helped them feel connected again. It was about healing and making the yard feel more like home." Nicole wiped a tear quietly in the back row. Their youngest daughter reached for her hand and whispered something soft only a mother could hear. Judge Judy paused and then looked back at Cheryl. "Let me ask you something. Were you close with your neighbors before this paint job?" Cheryl scoffed. "No, Mom, I tried, but they are always so loud. Their yard is chaotic. It is hard to enjoy my space." Judy flipped through her notes. "So what you are telling me is this fence was not the start of your frustration. This has been brewing for some time." Cheryl remained silent. Judge Judy pressed on. "Tell me about these other HOA complaints. You reported them for planting flowers and hanging wind chimes. Is that correct?" Cheryl nodded slowly. "Yes, Mom, they were violating guidelines." Judy stared her down. "Let me guess, you printed out the rule book and highlighted everything you think applies to them." Cheryl swallowed hard. "Yes, Mom." The judge shook her head slightly. "Miss Robinson, let me explain something. A homeowners association is not your personal army. You do not get to weaponize rules just because you do not like someone's lifestyle." Cheryl opened her mouth, but Judy stopped her with a firm wave. "No, I am not done." She turned toward David. "Mr. Miller, did the HOA ever issue fines based on her complaints?" "No, Mom, they inspected our property twice and said everything was within reason." Judy nodded. "That matches the letter I have here from the HOA board." She held up a printed email from the HOA stating that the Millers had not violated any enforceable rule and that no action would be taken. Judy leaned back again, tapping her pen on the bench. "Miss Robinson, you are upset your neighbor has a colorful fence and children who play outside. I get it. But what you brought to me today is not a lawsuit. It is a personal problem. You are trying to use this court as a weapon to get your way." Cheryl's voice cracked. But Your Honor, I worked hard for my home. I have lived there 15 years. I should not be forced to stare at something that makes me sick. Judy held up a hand again. And yet you are not forced to stare at anything. You could close the blinds, you could plant shrubs, you could paint your own side of the fence. Cheryl's eyes narrowed. I should not have to hide in my own home. Judy did not flinch. You are not hiding, Miss Robinson. You are choosing to obsess over something that frankly is none of your business. She looked around the courtroom before continuing. This happens more often than people realize. Two neighbors stop liking each other, and instead of talking it out, they turn to rules and courts and drama. The court is not a playground for grudges. Then she looked at Cheryl's lawyer. And you should know better than to waste the court's time with this kind of case. Brent Collins cleared his throat. Understood, Your Honor. Judge Judy turned back to Cheryl. Let me ask you something final. Do you have any evidence that this paint job lowered your property value? A letter from a realtor? A price estimate? Anything? Cheryl stood stiff. No, Mom, just my belief, based on market trends. Judy raised one eyebrow. Beliefs do not count here. We deal in proof. There was a long silence in the courtroom. Then Judge Judy leaned forward. Let me tell you what I see. I see a neighbor with a colorful fence that he paid for. I see children who wanted a bright space to remember someone. They lost. I see a woman who is angry, but lacks the proof to back her claims. Cheryl looked down at her shoes. The judge added, now if the HOA decides later that the paint violates their policy and issues a fine, that is a separate matter. But this court does not pre-enforce rules. We enforce what exists now, not what you wish would happen. She paused, then continued, I am denying your claim for damages. There is no breach of contract. There is no proof of co-ownership. And there is no medical or financial record of any harm suffered. Cheryl stood motionless. Her lips quivered, but she said nothing. Judge Judy added one more thing before closing. I advise both of you to stay on your own side of the fence, literally and figuratively. She turned to David and Nicole. And I encourage you to document everything going forward. Take photos, receipts, and keep a record of all communication, because I have a feeling this is not the last time you two will see each other in conflict. Nicole nodded slowly. Yes, Mom. Judge Judy's voice rang out one final time. Case dismissed. She slammed the gavel. Once the courtroom erupted into soft murmurs as people stood to leave. David let out a long breath of relief and hugged Nicole. Their daughters clapped quietly, not fully understanding what had just happened, but knowing it was something important. Cheryl remained still as her lawyer gathered their things. She did not look back as she left. But Judge Judy stayed, seated a moment longer, staring at the empty space where Cheryl had stood, thinking about how often anger disguised itself as righteousness, and how easily it unraveled in the light of truth. Just as the courtroom had mostly cleared and Judge Judy was about to stand, a hand shot up in the back row. Excuse me, Mom, I was asked to wait until after testimony before speaking. Judge Judy froze mid-movement. And you are? A man stepped forward confidently. He was tall, middle-aged, and wore a maintenance uniform with a patch that read Raymond. Raymond Dawson. Mom, I am the property manager for the HOA. I was scheduled to speak today in case more information was needed. Judy waved him forward. "Then come on up, Mr. Dawson. If you have something relevant, you better say it now." Raymond approached the witness stand as David and Nicole turned in their seats to watch. Cheryl crossed her arms but stayed silent. Judy asked plainly, "What do you know about this fence situation?" Raymond nodded. "A lot, Mom. I was there when the Millers first painted it, and I have handled every complaint Miss Robinson has filed in the past 2 years." The courtroom grew quiet again. Judy leaned forward. "Start from the beginning." Raymond cleared his throat. "Last spring the Millers asked if they could paint their side of the fence. I told them HOA rules do not control individual fence colors as long as the fence is on their property. I told them to make sure it was within their survey line and to keep receipts." Judy raised her brow. "So you gave them the green light?" "Yes, Mom." "And did they follow the survey?" "Absolutely. I even double-checked when Cheryl filed her complaint. I pulled up the property maps myself. The fence is within their boundary." Judy looked toward Cheryl. "Is that true?" Cheryl spoke through gritted teeth. "He did check it, yes." Judy turned back to Raymond. "So what is your understanding of the conflict here?" Raymond shrugged slightly. "In my opinion, Cheryl Robinson wants control over the aesthetics of the entire block. She has filed 8 complaints this year alone. 5 of those were against the Millers. 1 was about a toddler pool, another about a garden statue, and even one for the way they hung their Christmas lights." A few people in the courtroom chuckled quietly. Judy's face remained firm. "And how did the HOA respond?" "We investigated each time, found nothing to enforce, and we sent Cheryl a letter asking her to reduce unnecessary complaints." Judy raised one hand. "Wait, you asked her to stop filing complaints?" "Yes, Mom, respectfully, but directly." "Did she?" "No, Mom. If anything, she doubled down." Judy turned her attention back to Cheryl. "You did not mention that letter earlier, Miss Robinson." Cheryl did not respond. Judge Judy stared hard. "You filed 8 complaints in a year 5 against the same family. That does not suggest concern. It suggests obsession." David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Nicole placed a hand on his knee and gave a slight nod. Raymond stepped in again. "May I also say something about the emotional damage Cheryl claimed?" "Go ahead." "She has called me multiple times saying the fence makes her feel watched and unsafe. But the fence faces away from her windows, and it is not reflective or threatening in any way." Judy rubbed her temple for a moment, then asked, "Do you believe this is a safety issue, Mr. Dawson?" "No, Mom. I believe it is a personality conflict." Judge Judy let out a slow breath. "You know what I see, this is not about fences or paint. This is about control, about one neighbor who cannot stand not getting her way." Cheryl's lawyer stood abruptly. "Your Honor, may I clarify something on behalf of my client?" "Go ahead." Brent Collins cleared his throat. "Cheryl has been a resident for over a decade. She has always taken pride in upholding neighborhood standards. She felt overlooked and disrespected by the Millers. Actions, that sense of exclusion, made her feel powerless. This case was not meant to punish. It was her way of restoring balance." Judy stared at him for a long moment. "Mr. Collins, you might be sincere, but what you just described is not a legal argument. It is therapy if your client feels left out. there are better ways to handle it than dragging neighbors to court." Then she added, "And as for you, Miss Robinson," Cheryl finally looked up. "You could have walked next door and had a conversation. You could have planted vines on your side. If you hated the color so much, you could have learned their story, maybe even helped them paint." Her voice softened slightly. "You could have shown grace, but instead you showed aggression." There was a stillness in the air. Raymond added one final note. "I want to mention one more thing Cheryl once told me. If she could make the Millers move away, she would." Judge Judy raised her head quickly. "She said that?" "Yes, Mom, I documented it in the HOA file." Judy tapped the bench twice. "Well then, that confirms everything." She turned once more to Cheryl. "You used the court as a weapon not to seek justice, but to pursue your own agenda. That is not what this courtroom is for." Then she glanced toward David and Nicole. "And I commend you both for your restraint and patience in the face of hostility." Nicole nodded with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Judy." Judge Judy gathered her notes and gave her ruling. "Case remains dismissed, all claims denied, no damages awarded." Before leaving the bench, Judy added one last word. "This courtroom is not a battleground, it is a place for truth." And today that truth spoke loudly. As she exited the bench, the courtroom sat still for a few more seconds. David reached out to shake Raymond's hand. Nicole gave her daughters a quiet smile, and Cheryl sat alone in her chair, staring at the floor. After Judge Judy left the courtroom, the air felt heavy with what had just been said. The quiet that followed was not just silence, it was reflection. For a moment no one stood, no one moved, and Cheryl Robinson stayed in her seat, eyes focused on the table in front of her like it was the only thing in the world she could still control. David and Nicole Miller slowly rose, not in triumph, but in relief. Nicole gathered her purse, whispered something to their daughters, and then turned to Raymond Dawson. "Thank you for speaking up," she said quietly. Raymond nodded kindly. "You, too, did not deserve this." As the courtroom slowly emptied, Cheryl's attorney, Brent Collins, sat down beside her. "Cheryl, listen," he said softly. "I have to be honest with you, this case is close. And if you keep pushing this with new filings or appeals, you might risk something worse." Cheryl scoffed, but said nothing. Brent leaned in closer. "Sometimes, Cheryl, winning is not about being right, it is about knowing when to let something go." Cheryl finally looked at him and asked one question. "So what now?" Brent paused, then said, "Now you go home and decide what kind of neighbor you really want to be." Outside the courtroom, Nicole stood in the sun with her daughters while David called his father to tell him the case was over. A few reporters stood at the edge of the steps snapping pictures, but no one from the press had shown interest in covering such a local dispute in depth. To the world, it was just another HOA issue. But to David and Nicole, it had been a battle for dignity. Nicole turned to her husband. "Do you think she will leave us alone now?" David sighed. "I do not know, I hope so. But if not, at least we know we can fight back the right way." Their youngest daughter tugged at Nicole's hand. "Can we get ice cream now?" Nicole smiled. "Yes, baby, yes we can." Meanwhile, Cheryl exited the courthouse alone. Brent had offered to walk with her, but she declined. She held her keys tight in her fist as if that grip could give her strength. A few passers-by glanced at her, recognizing her from the courtroom, but said nothing. One woman gave her a look that said it all without saying a word. When Cheryl got into her car, she sat there in the driver's seat without starting the engine. She looked out the windshield as if replaying the day in her head. Her jaw tightened and loosened again. She knew it. Deep down, she had lost more than a case. She had lost the image she had built of herself for so many years, the protector of the block, the neighborhood's moral compass. But today she had been stripped of that image in front of a judge and her neighbors. 2 days later, back in the neighborhood, life moved on. Kids rode bikes, dogs barked, someone down the street was trimming hedges. The Millers were in their backyard repainting the last touches on the fence that had caused all the uproar. They had decided to repaint it anyway, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to change the color, not to please Cheryl, but to please themselves. Raymond stopped by during his routine drive through the neighborhood. He rolled down his window and waved. "Looks good, Miller family." David laughed. "Hopefully it will stay out of court this time." Nicole smiled as she helped one daughter clean a paintbrush. "We are just glad it is over." Raymond leaned his arm on the steering wheel. "Truth be told, I think this whole street learned something from that courtroom." Nicole looked up. "You think so?" "I know so." Down the street, Cheryl walked from her mailbox slowly. She glanced over at the Millers. Nicole saw her. There was a pause, a moment of decision, and then Nicole raised a hand and waved. It was not a big wave. It was not even a friendly one. It was just acknowledgement. Cheryl hesitated. Then with the smallest gesture, she lifted her hand back. The wave lasted less than a second. But it was something. Later that week, Judge Judy sat in her chambers reviewing a new batch of cases. Her clerk knocked on the door. "That fence case is making rounds in the city forums, Judy." She looked up. Let them talk. The truth stood tall, and the court stood taller. Her clerk smiled. "I think the Millers would agree with that." Judy nodded. Justice is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is just plain quiet and clear. And with that, she turned back to her desk. The courtroom was quiet once again. Judge Judy returned to her bench after a short recess, her expression calm but unreadable. Everyone knew the verdict had already been delivered, but today the final filings would be addressed and the case officially closed. Cheryl Robinson stood at the plaintiff table with Brent Collins by her side. She looked noticeably more composed than the previous sessions, but still carried a shadow in her eyes, the kind that followed you when you knew you had gone too far. Across the room, David and Nicole Miller sat calmly. Their 2 daughters stayed home this time. Raymond Dawson also returned for closure. He nodded to David and Nicole as he entered and took a seat near the back. Judy adjusted her glasses and tapped her fingers on the folder before her. "All right, let us close this matter once and for all." Brent rose and addressed the court. "Your Honor, my client would like to submit a final statement for the record." Judy nodded. "Go ahead." Cheryl stood up slowly. She cleared her throat before speaking. For the first time, she did not look at David and Nicole with tension or judgment. She looked with something closer to regret. "I brought this case forward, believing I was defending the neighborhood's values. I realize now I was not defending, I was attacking." She paused as her voice softened. "To the Millers, I may never be your friend, and that is all right, but I want the record to show that I was wrong to escalate this to a courtroom. I let my anger speak louder than reason." Judy watched her carefully. You are not the first, and you will not be the last to confuse pride with principle. Cheryl sat back down without another word. Nicole asked the judge for permission to speak briefly. Go ahead, Judy said. Nicole rose from her seat and turned slightly toward Cheryl. We never wanted a fight, we just wanted peace. And to feel welcome, we hope after this that maybe you will see us not as a problem, but as part of the community too. She sat back down, and David reached for her hand under the table. Judy closed the file in front of her and spoke firmly. The court acknowledges both statements and will enter them into the record. This matter is officially closed. No further actions will be taken by this court. She paused, then added, let this courtroom be a reminder that sometimes we win by learning not how to argue, but how to live. With a final gavel tap, she stood and exited the bench. Raymond Dawson remained seated as the rest of the room began to rise. He watched Cheryl. Then he watched the Millers. Then he smiled quietly to himself. Outside the courthouse, the sky was bright, the type of blue that made even hard days seem a little softer. David and Nicole walked down the steps together. No cameras, no reporters, just peace. Cheryl stood off to the side. She looked like she wanted to say something, but she did not yet. Nicole saw her. David noticed too. They kept walking. A week later, a neighborhood block meeting was held. It was the first since the court proceedings ended. Raymond opened the meeting with updates about upcoming street repairs and summer event planning. Then he said, before we close this meeting, I want to acknowledge the strength of all parties during the recent dispute. The room grew quiet. There were disagreements, harsh words, lawsuits, but also learning, apologies, growth. He looked around. I hope we all understand now that fences do not just divide yards. Sometimes they divide hearts. It is our job to paint over that too. People nodded. A few even clapped softly. Cheryl stood in the back. She had not spoken during the entire meeting, but as the room began to disperse, she approached Raymond. Thank you for that, she said quietly. Raymond looked at her. Just do not sue anybody at the barbecue next month. Cheryl almost laughed. No promises. That night, David and Nicole sat on their back porch. The fence between them and Cheryl's yard stood strong. Same color, same design, but it no longer felt like a battlefield. Nicole sipped her iced tea. Do you think she will really change? David shrugged. I do not know, but we did. She looked at him. Yeah, we did. The stars above blinked softly. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn sprinkler started. Another ordinary night in the neighborhood, but everything felt different now. In another part of the city, Judy sat in her chambers once again. Another case file before her. Another dispute waiting for justice. She opened it, read the first line, closed it again for a moment. Then she whispered to herself, they think it is about fences. It never is. And with that, she picked up her pen and prepared for the next chapter.